Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today I just wanted to share with you my thoughts around the game Anzio, The Fight for the Beachhead 1944 from White Dog Games, a game that I unboxed only a week or so ago. I've managed to get in a solitaire game, and also we played a 2-player stroke 3-player game last night at the club. So I just wanted to share with you my thoughts around the game, how it plays, the mechanics, the solo side of things, and replayability. What I'm going to do is just go through and give you a kind of an overview of the sequence of play, some of the key rules within each of the elements of the sequence of play, and then how those different elements played out in the two games that I took part in. So first of all, you've got, as you will have seen from the unboxing, quite a small footprint map. It's a hex and counter game. You've got the Allies starting off on the landing beaches either side of Nettuno and Anzio, and then you've got the Germans starting up in the mountain passes coming down into this area to drive the beachhead in. So sequence of play starts with a couple of things. You got weather, initiative checks. These are very straightforward asymmetric checks, nothing complicated, straightforward roll of the dice. Basically you've got clear, cloudy or rain. Clear pretty much means open, no problem at all from a point of view of movements, and no issues as far as bombardment is concerned. Bombardment is quite a key element of the game. As soon as you get into cloud cover, that impacts on potential German air power, which in turn impacts on the potential impact of bombardment. And then when you get into rain, that affects movements for both sides, particularly for armour, because of the mud and the issues with the conditions, and it also does still impact on bombardment as well. So weather, without being overkill, does play an element in the game, no doubt, and we had a few elements certainly in our 2-player game where we had all different aspects of weather came into play. So that's very simply done. Same with initiative. Slightly slanted in the game here, so that the Germans will more often or not have the initiative throughout the game. Again, it's just done through a dice roll. It's simple, straightforward, nothing too complicated there. Again, both these elements, for the more detailed sort of grognards amongst you, may be a little bit too basic, but I think for this scale of type of game it works absolutely fine. We then have reinforcement arrivals. These start to kick in from turn 2 onwards. So I think it's turns 2, 3, 5 and 7 of the 12 turns in the game. There will be some form of reinforcements coming in for both sides at different times, and the Allied reinforcements will normally start coming on the Anzio or Nettuno hex specifically. For the Germans, it will be one of the 3 mountain road passes from the north of the map downwards. Those reinforcements really critical at critical times. The Germans get an absolute shed load of reinforcements quite early on in the game. The Allies is a bit more spread out, and again I think the balance and the weighting of those works really well with the longevity of the game over the 12 turns. I will come on to the German movement orders for solitaire play when I talk about the solitaire game, but you're then into movement. The initiative player goes first, the non-initiative player goes second. You basically can activate everything, so there's no friction as far as that's concerned. However, the initiative becomes quite important at certain times of the game, where the German player probably would prefer the Allies to be operating first, but more often than not that's not the case. So there's some quite interesting dynamics with the way the movements work. Terrain is a big factor, so things like canals and rivers, woods, they all have an impact in terms of slowing down movement. If you can stick to the main roads, certainly that gives all your forces much more operational capabilities. So occupying key junctions on roads can block lines of control and hold up enemy forces getting to certain locations, and again that's a critical element of the game. Once both sides have done movement, you then come into off-table bombardment. Now again, this is done with initiative player first, then non-initiative player. For the German player, as long as the conditions are appropriate, i.e. clear, then they make a simple d6 roll to see whether air power plays a part in their bombardment roll. If they're successful, they can add +1 to their bombardment roll, of which they get 1 per turn. On a table, again straightforward table, they need normally a 5 or more to potentially hit, a 6 or more to hit in cloudy or rainy conditions. And for the Allies, they don't get air power, but they generally need 3+ to hit in clear conditions, and probably a 5+ in cloudy or rain conditions. From turn 4 onwards, you double, i.e. you get 2 rolls for bombardments for the Allies, so that becomes a really important part in the Allied strategy in terms of trying to break up some of the German formations, particularly some of their heavy armour, which is particularly strong and can cause the Allies a lot of problems. So you do the bombardments and then you do the combats. So this basically is hexes adjacent to one another. You can choose to initiate combat or not. You don't have to. Sometimes that's quite a sensible option. Combats are quite good. You work out your differential in strength points first, and then look at that on the combat result table before then working out modifiers which affect the dice roll that you're going to make. So things like armour in your formation, panzer grenadiers, being behind a canal, being in a forest, having support, which is an adjacent 5 strength plus unit in the combat, adds positive modifiers. Likewise, if you've got full strength enemy stacks adjacent to you, that is a negative modifier. So there are a few key things there, without being too many, that can influence where you are on that CRT. So combat, quite straightforward. A lot of the time combat will result in retreats. Big thing in the game is retreats. So because of the way the map is designed, you need to be very mindful of ensuring that you've got areas that your units can retreat into, because if they're retreating into zones of control, they will take extra step losses. If indeed they cannot retreat, even through your own troops, which you cannot retreat either, they are eliminated, and that becomes quite important as the game develops. So that's very simply the overhead of the rules and how they work. In terms of extra things, I mean, the rules themselves are literally 3.5 pages, I would say. There's some optional rules in there as well. You've got a very simple solitaire bot in the game. Basically, you will roll a dice at the beginning of each turn, and that will determine the German player's orders, and then you have to follow within a framework those orders for the turn for the German AI player. I've got to say the solitaire bot was okay. Really, you are just playing a game on your own, really operating both sides. I don't think the solitaire bot added a huge amount. It gave you a little bit of direction, but you're still making a lot of those decisions as a player. So yeah, it could have been developed a bit more, but again, this is a small footprint beer and pretzels type game. It's not a complicated game. So, you know, I've seen comments about the solitaire being very poor, but at least it gives you some kind of framework. I don't think it detracts from what this game is all about. It's not meant to be a very complicated, in-depth simulation. What I do like is you get quite a lot of varied types of units. You got parachute paras, you got rangers, you got commandos, you got armor, you got panzer grenadiers. You got some very interesting dynamics in there. The Germans have some very hard-hitting armoured units. The Allies are quite weak in armour, but the Allies have a little bit more tactical flexibility. So that's in terms of units like their paratroops and commandos, rangers can stack with other groups. So you can only have 2 units in a stack. Normally you are restricted to only 2 units of the same division being in a stack, whereas for the Allies they can add these other elements to a stack, so but still not exceeding the 2. So that can help the Allies a little bit, tactical flexibility, so to speak. What's my overview thoughts of the game? As I say, it's not designed to be a heavy simulation. I really enjoyed it. I've played a couple of games now. I will play it again. I think it offers an interesting game, played out over probably a couple of hours realistically. You could play it quite easily on your own, play it with 2 players. We played it with 3 last night. I had the British, Nick, my pal, had the Americans, and Mike had the Germans. That was quite interesting. So from turn 4 we split bombardment so that the American player had 1, the British player had 1, the German player had 1. That added some slight differences. Again, some challenges for the Allies as we're operating different units. The British contingent's quite small. The Americans obviously are the bigger party. So it's quite interesting. In terms of my solitaire game, because of the orders that the Germans had were quite aggressive all the time, the Germans would plough down, and I found myself, as the Allied player, hemmed into a very small element of the map quite quickly, and very defensive minded for the rest of the game. I wasn't in any position to be able to break out and do much, although my bombardments were quite effective in breaking up some of the panzer formations. In the multiplayer game, it was slightly different. We were a pen back initially because the German player was able to come flying down the roads with some quite heavy armour formations and force us back. But as the kind of attrition started to apply and our reinforcements arrived, we were able to move into the Patagonia woods. We were able to get up to Milleta River, the Mussolini Canal, and start to sort of open up a little bit, and able to make a few counter thrusts, although for the Allies it's very, very difficult, and as we found, okay, we were a little bit unlucky when bombardments were poor, and our rolls on our combats were poor as well, so we weren't able to maybe punch through as much as we would like to have done. But the Germans just seemed to have substantial amounts of fresh units that they could bring in and fill in gaps as and when they needed to. So the Allied player victory conditions in the game are very challenging. They need to defend Anzio and Nettuno and stop the German player getting those hexes, because if the German player has one of those occupied within one for a whole turn, they win the game. If they occupy either of those at the end of turn 12, they win the game. For the Allies, they need to occupy Campoloni or Cisternia, and that involves breaking out and being able to push forward, and that's quite hard with the sheer volume of German units in play. So you do really need bombardments to be successful. You need to pick very carefully where you apply those bombardments. So whether you focus them in a particular area to try and break up bulks of units and stacks. But meanwhile, the other player really also needs to be mindful of ensuring the German player can't break through into either of those Anzio and Nettuno boxes and grab victory that way. So in both games, we ended up at the end of turn 12 with a draw result. I think our thoughts around the game last night, the multiplayer game, were that both of us could have been maybe a little bit more aggressive. However, what we did find was that the attrition really starts to kick in as you get into the later turns, and by turn 12 actually there was very little either side could do other than hold its positions because of our respective strengths. So that's just some general thoughts around the game. As I say, overall I think for a beer and pretzels game, small footprint game, which scratches an itch of this period for a couple of hours, really nice little game. I enjoyed it. It's not probably for the grognard, that bean counter, or someone who wants detail. It's not an in-depth simulation, but it gives you a flavour of some of the challenges maybe that these Anzio landings have, particularly with the weather, the terrain, and kind of you can see why the Allies had such a tough job of achieving their objectives. So really like it. It's one to have a look at if this sort of tickles your fancy. I say it won't be for everybody, but that's my review of Anzio Fight for the Beachhead 1944 from White Dog Games. Hopefully you've liked some of the pictures I've posted, and I'll put a few more at the end of the video. Thanks for watching, and see you all again soon.